Today we're having a hearing about the federal agency's reliance on outdated and unsupported information technology, a ticking time bomb. The federal government is spending more than $80 billion annually on IT, and it largely doesn't work. With the majority of the spending focused on maintaining and operating legacy systems, this is obviously a major concern for the United States Congress and the operation of the federal government. Such spending on legacy IT results in higher costs, security vulnerabilities, where old software and operating systems are no longer supported by vendors. The federal government is years, and in some cases decades, behind the private sector. We cannot have federal agencies buying spare parts on eBay for IT systems, such is the case at the Department of Labor. The federal government also cannot rely on 930 million lines of code using more than 70 legacy programming languages. This is the best estimate that we have on the numbers based on the surveys that we did with the various agencies. That includes over 155 million lines of COBOL and 135 million lines of Fortran coding language that was first used in the 1960s. In fact, 50 years ago, Dartmouth described Fortran as quote-unquote old-fashioned. So 50 years ago, they thought it was old-fashioned, and it's still in use today. This does not even include Department of Defense or Labor, because they could not tell us how many lines of code. So you can imagine at the DoD how many millions upon millions of lines of code that are also out there in those agencies. Some agencies still use Windows 3.1, which came onto the market in the early 1990s, or Windows XP, which came onto the market in the early 2000s. I read a document recently from the Department of Justice, and it was a WordPerfect document. I love WordPerfect. They're from Utah, and they still sell that product and update it. They had an update in the last 60 days, but my guess is if they tried to send you a WordPerfect document, you might have a difficult time opening it. The federal CIO, Tony Scott, was one of our witnesses today. He has stated the need to update IT legacy systems is a crisis bigger than Y2K. And I will note, from personally, I'm so pleased that Mr. Scott has joined the federal government. He has quite a background and reputation. He's the kind of talent that I think our federal government needs, and to have somebody of his caliber helping to tackle these issues, answering the call to service for our nation is really an important step forward, and I applaud the Obama administration for encouraging him and getting him to participate here. I think he is part of the solution and not part of the problem. Let me give you some examples of our deep concern here. The Department of Defense Strategic Automated Command and Control System is 50 years old and runs on a 1970s IBM Series 1 computer that uses an 8-inch floppy disk. This is an IBM, this is an 8-inch floppy disk. It takes 3.2 million of these to equal one flash drive. So you can go get a flash drive down, at Best Buy, or you can get 3.2 million of these to get the same amount of data stored. And this is still what the Department of Defense is using. I want to show a couple pictures here. These are from the brochure. We didn't actually, but this is what the Department of Defense in many ways is still using. So that's nice 1970s, first class brochures there. The styles that's styling. But that's literally what the kind of technology that we're using it up against. DoD is only now, by the end of fiscal year 2017, finally scheduled to update parts of this system. It's good, but it's over decades overdue. The system reminds me, remember the movie War Games, the Whopper, the War Operations Plan Response from the 1983 movie? It's still like that, unfortunately. The IRS Individual Master File, sometimes called the IMF, which is the authoritative data source for individual taxpayer information, is also more than 50 years old. It is written in low-level computer code that is difficult to write and maintain. The IRS has general plans to modernize and has made some progress, but provided no specific date on which the IMF will be turned off and the new system turned on. I hope that changes here today. Goals must have deadlines, otherwise they're just dreams, and we need specifics. The really scary part about all this is that DOD and the IRS are not alone among the federal agencies in relying on legacy IT systems and unsupported software and operating systems. So how do we fix this situation? How do we protect the nation against the vulnerabilities that are inevitably there with such outdated technology? We're going to hear a lot today about a proposal to establish a $3 billion IT modernization fund to help agencies move off of these legacy systems. But there are three issues that I'd like to mention proactively about this proposal. I think it's a serious proposal, and it's based on a lot of good work done in the private sector. First, the GAO reported last week at a joint IT Government Operations Subcommittee hearing there are millions of dollars worth of savings still on the table from data center consolidation. To date, agencies have closed more than 3,000 of 10,500 data centers and achieved $2.8 billion in cost savings. Most of these savings are attributed to just 4 agencies: the Department of Commerce, the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and Treasury. So there's much available in terms of savings that's still on the table. I think I'm much more inclined to allow CIOs who are achieving savings and have the foresight and plan to move forward to use those savings to upgrade legacy systems rather than simply writing a blank check for all CIOs, regardless of how well they are currently managing their resources. Second, the committee wants to see progress on its FITARA implementation scorecard before giving CIOs additional resources. Under FITARA, CIOs now have a proper seat at the table. To the men and women in the CIO positions, they must be qualified, motivated, and empowered to make decisions within their agencies, and they must be held accountable. The pattern of Fs moving to Ds and Ds moving to Cs and so forth will go a long way towards convincing the committee that CIOs will appropriately utilize additional resources allocated to modernizing legacy systems. And third, I note that Mr. Milholland appears today under a subpoena. IRS Commissioner John Koskinen declined to allow Mr. Mulholland to testify voluntarily and stated to the committee, and I quote, this comes from a letter, "Spending time preparing for a hearing would take Mr. Milholland away from his important role in leading IT development and operation, and we would be disruptive to the IRS," end quote. That is wholly and totally unacceptable. This is part of the solution, not part of the problem, and the accountability before Congress is part of this issue. Preparing for, testifying at a hearing on IT issues in front of this committee does not take away from the important role. It's a key part of your important role. The committee hopes the IRS's attitude and position is not widespread against federal government, and it's a change in attitude from the IRS commissioner. IRS commissioner insisted that he personally be here to testify, but we want to have the people who are actually responsible in the day-to-day and spend 100% of their day working on this issue. It's very frustrating. Taxpayers deserve a government that leverages technology to serve them rather than one that deploys unsecured, decades-old technology that places their sensitive and personal information at risk. We have a long way to go to get from COBOL to the cloud, but I'm committed to helping us get there. I know other members of the committee are working on this as well, and I want to duly note Ranking Member Cummings, Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Kelly, Chairman Meadows, and Ranking Member Conley among those who are spending a significant amount of time trying to help tackle and solve the problem, and I appreciate their insight and their participation. This is not a partisan issue. We all need to come together on this on both sides of the aisle. It is the right thing to do, and it's a vital part of the infrastructure that we need in order to have a fully functional government. So we'll have a good hearing today. Appreciate the witnesses being here. We'll now recognize the Ranking Member, Mr.